Okay, wonderful. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we're talking about Katie Beckett Medicaid Deeming Waiver. And as you know, I'm Debbie Dobbs. I've posted my website and the email address for our office, and here's my phone number as well. Want to make sure that everybody knows that nothing that I say today, either spoken or written, is medical or legal advice. I am a lay advocate, and if you have any questions regarding those items, you need to consult with an attorney or a physician for medical and legal advice. Uh-oh, my slide is not wanting to move. Just a second. Here we go. So if you registered in advance, as Satara mentioned, you should have been emailed the link. And if you're watching this via archive, you should also be able to access all of the handouts. So in addition to the blank application, which I've gotten from the Katie Beckett office, as well as the DCH instructions, there's a sample filled out packet as well that we're going to be going over today in the webinar. There's the Department of Community Health manual, which is important that everybody looks at. There will be information in there as well regarding renewal process, as well as a link to get a copy of Navigating the Maze. You can download that from my webinar. So many people have always told me that it was really hard to find information on accessing resources. So I put together this guide. It's over 35 pages long right now, speaking about, there will be an updated link to this webinar, information about family support funding, information about how to get iPads. Some are income-based, some are not. There's WISH camp experiences, vehicle adaptation. So there's a ton of information. I do update that periodically, and I'm in the process of updating it now. So if you get a copy of it, I will be emailing you an updated copy after I have completed it. So today, our agenda, we're first going to do an overview of all of the documents that you're going to need, because there's a whole lot of information. We got a lot to cover. So get your pen and paper handy so you can be prepared to take notes. And I'm going to describe the process of who, what, and where, and we'll walk you through step by step of how this whole process works. Then we're going to discuss the level of care criteria, which are the details of the eligibility criteria. People ask me all the time, am I eligible? Because my child has whatever diagnosis. You have to look at the level of care criteria, as these are the eligibility guidelines. And then next, we're going to go into detail in terms of how to fill out the forms. And then finally, I'm going to describe a few things of what's next after you're awarded the deeming waiver, because this is the gateway to other services. Also, if you are not eligible, there's other funding available for you. I encourage everybody to always apply for Katie Beckett Medicaid if you're ineligible for SSI. And we'll go into in a little bit what that means, because even if you do not meet level of care criteria, this will allow you to access other funding. So doing nothing, you're literally throwing away money. Either you're going to be awarded Katie Beckett and you'll be able to, and your child will be able to benefit from having access to that funding, or you'll get a denial. And if you get a level of care denial, meaning that your child doesn't quite meet the level of care needed for Katie Beckett, then you can access to other funding. So a little bit about me. I worked for over 20 years managing medical practices and did a lot of consulting. Thank goodness that I did, because I really needed that experience when I had my son, who is born with a disability. I use a lot of that experience and work in terms of helping families now apply for Katie Beckett. people hire me to assist them with their applications, give them advice on now and comp and accessing to other funding. So I offer various levels of support for families who want this. I really do feel it's critically important that everybody have an understanding how to access this, which is why I'm going into great detail today in terms of how you can do it and do it yourself. I also work with families as an educational advocate. So once children with disabilities are school aged and they're in school, they may have an IEP or a 504 plan. And so I assist those families. I've had a lot of training on that. I think training is really important. That was via the Georgia Advocacy Office and COPA, which is a national organization, William and Mary Law Schools, ISEA program, Lights Law, NSCAA as well. As you see today, I also do seminars on funding and educational advocacy. I love being able to empower parents and professionals with this knowledge because ultimately, you are the ones who are going to be independently or individually impacting your kiddos. I help run the North Fulton Autism Support Group as well, and I have volunteered for many organizations. I was a big brother, big sister match for over 12 years, and now I'm feeling rather old. You're going to have to forgive me. She's an adult and has children of her own. So I encourage you to visit me on Facebook and like and follow my page. I frequently am posting disability-related information there and also keep people updated regarding what seminars that I'm doing as well. So now we're going to go into a great detail in terms of what the requirements are, but what I want you to know is what you need to have an understanding, and everything that I'm talking to you about is what we know as of today. Things with this program change. So today's date is January 25th, 2022. And so tomorrow things may change, and you'll see as we go through this webinar, there have been a lot of changes over the years, and I'm going to be pointing them out. So I also want everybody to note that the information is not always current and complete on the Department of Community Health's website, I found. And so some of the things we were discussing seems to be a moving target, and others are a little bit more stable. So when applying for Katie Beckett, the most important thing is to get all of your documents together. You're going to need your health insurance card and Social Security card, birth certificate. You're going to need, and I want to stop just a second on birth certificate. So your child does need to be a citizen or naturalized in order to have access to Katie Beckett Medicaid. That's one of the rules. So this is a very common question that families ask me. You're going to need to be able to show proof of SSI and eligibility. And there's various ways that this can be done. Either by showing a copy of the Social Security denial letter or proof of statement of income or assets from the family. So you can just tell them what you're making. You don't even have to give them copies. For initial applications or renewals, they're currently stating that your SSI denial needs to be current, and they are defining that within the last 90 days. I also want you to be gathering up information such as a list of all of your doctors and therapists, frequency of visits, because all of these things are going to be indicated on your application. So a lot of this application is the legwork. It's the gathering up of all of the information and pulling it all together so your doctor can complete a good application for you and a complete application. So one of the things that I tell everybody is to please get a copy of your entire medical record of your child. Now, I find that to be very important, right? I said before, I worked in healthcare for many years, and I see a lot of medical records looking through people's applications when I'm assisting them to apply for Katie Beckett, because I look at each and every single page. I cannot tell you how many errors that I'm seeing and or finding in medical records. It's not uncommon when people hire me to do their applications that we find a diagnosis that parents weren't even informed about. So, this is not uncommon. So just as best practices, get a copy of your entire record. You do not, and please do not send your entire record to Katie Beckett. They only want the last 12 months. But you're going to need to get records from like your pediatrician and all of the other different therapists that you're going to see, like your GI and your neurologist, developmental pediatrician, ophthalmologist, anything where you might have laboratory or test results, all of that fun information that you're going to need to get copies of. Again, you don't need to send in everything, only things that are within the last 12 months that they are wanting. They are also going to be wanting copies of both your school and private signed therapy records, such as occupational, physical therapy, speech therapy, and any nursing notes. And they're going to want to have the last 90 days of those. In addition to those notes, they're going to want to have the most recent evaluation and plan of care. So in school, you're not going to necessarily have a plan of care. But with all therapies, there should be some sort of an evaluation that's informing them. So that would be included as well. Please also get notes from your ABA provider or other providers for behavioral therapies. Department of Community Health has stated in the past that they will only count therapies that are performed by licensed providers. But attorneys who file appeals on decisions have explained to me that it's a need for your child and that your doctor has ordered it. And so if they indicate this on your application and it's for an ICFID level of care, they're looking at the requirements of active treatment. And oftentimes, there are things that are overseen. So, for example, child may go to a physical therapist, but you're having to practice this at home and it's overseen multiple days per week. So that's, part of what needs to be done. And I would imagine that should be indicated in their records. In addition, you're going to be gathering up a list of all of your medications. And I want you to also include over-counter medications and supplements that are ordered by your doctor, along with the strength and dosage directions. And you're going to want to get a list and copies of any assets that your child has, such as a bank account, savings account, property deeds, trusts. So certain accounts, such as like a college savings plan, like a 529 plan, these are not child-owned accounts, right? So the owner of the account is typically the parent. Stable accounts are also exempt by the asset limits, as well as special needs trusts and UTMA accounts. So if your child has assets over $2,000, this could potentially disqualify your child from Katie Beckett. So, children can't have kind of money in their name. And people are always like, well, what does that money include? So it's not the 529, right? That's owned by somebody else. It's not a stable account. It's not an UTMA account at the child's age. But let's just say they have a savings account in their name and grandma gave them a whole bunch of money and there's, $5,000 in there. Well, that could make them ineligible for SSI or for any type of Medicaid product, actually. And so we want to be very careful about what is in your child's name. They also look at the child's income, and income also includes child support. So if they are having a lot of child support, you definitely need to speak to an attorney about how the finances are provided, and look in terms of getting some recommendations for financial planning for a child with a disability, and may need to look at a trust. Parents need to have their income amount over a certain amount in order to be ineligible for SSI. So they cannot be very, very low income and have very, very low assets, because with that low income and low assets, the child could qualify for SSI. If they qualify for SSI, then they would get Medicaid. With that, you cannot be eligible for Katie Beckett. So I'll go into this again. It gets very, very confusing for people. So we will be talking about that. Also, it's a good idea for everybody who has a child with disability to get proper estate planning to protect your child's Medicaid benefits long-term. I cannot stress the importance of this. I've seen some very sad things happen to children and young adults with disabilities if they did not have proper estate planning going on with them. So please protect that. When you, I also think it's helpful if you give a copy of a picture of your child inserted into the document, not as a loose thing, but like inserted into perhaps one of the attachments. I think it's helpful to individualize the application. If your child has an IEP or an IFSP, this is also going to need to be provided. It does need to be current, not in a draft version. So IEPs are for children with disabilities who are 3 or older. Under 3, the program is through Babies Can't Wait. And if you're eligible for Babies Can't Wait, then you would be getting a IFSP. The last requirement is the developmental assessment. So developmental assessments are for when children are under 6. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later about what that is. And then for children 6 and over, they're going to need a psychological evaluation, and you are going to need one of these every 3 years. This is only needed for applications where the child has a diagnosis or a condition that results in a cognitive impairment. So required for diagnosis of like cerebral palsy, developmental delay, autism disorders, pervasive developmental disorders, intellectual disability, epilepsy, Down syndrome, anything related to those. So for children who require, let's just say, simply nursing care, and there is not an intellectual or developmental delay, and their only needs are nursing needs, then this testing is not required for them. I have to say the vast majority of clients and applications that I have, there are other significant delays that are going on with them. And so more often than not, that developmental assessment or the psychological evaluation is needed for them. So by this point, I'm watching the chat and I'm seeing 8 million questions go up. And I know a lot of people are probably feeling really, 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 really overwhelmed and just even thinking about gathering all of these documents. Believe me, you're not alone in this. Just take it one step at a time. Following some of these suggestions in the webinar will make your application process easier in the future. It's not uncommon that I hear from families who are wanting my assistance in preparing applications, and they comment to me that they've been attempting to do it themselves for more than a year. And so when posting announcements on social media for the webinar, I saw many comments from people who had not been able to complete the application, that they've started it many times. Everybody has their own barriers to this. Please know that you're not alone in this. This is one of the most frequent reasons why people call me for assistance, because they've been unable to do it themselves for whatever reason. Maybe they're overwhelmed or don't understand it, or simply don't have the time or interest in doing it. Hopefully today, this webinar is going to at least take away the I don't understand it portion, because we're going to be going through it in a great amount of detail. We all have competing demands, and please just, try and set aside a little bit of time as you can work through this. It really is worth it. Many children simply are not able to get the services and supports that they need without this. And I tell families that it's really costing you more to do nothing, not just from a financial level by having to pay out of pocket, but also the costs to your child by the limitations and services that they may not be able to get because you might not be able to afford it. So just think about that as your motivation as moving forward. Another issue is that, it can be a very challenging and difficult process coming to the reality of your child's diagnosis. And they may have been recently diagnosed, or thinking about the, what ifs and all of the differences of your child. And this is very normal to be feeling like this, and you've had an unexpected turn in the road. Please just breathe deep, take care of yourself, get the help and support that you need to work through these emotions. Your child really does need you to be their best advocate. Okay, so some important websites. So SSI limits. If you have questions and you're thinking, I don't know, am I close to the SSI limits? Social Security Administration has a website here on the screen, and you can write that down and look at those limits. It will, if you're uncertain or feel like you're close to the limits, I encourage you to apply for SSI. You can, call the 800 number that I have listed on the screen. You can also apply online. I suggest you call the 800 number. That will be a start to the process. That's going to be faster than putting in all of the information online, particularly if you're way above the limits. If you know you're going to be denied due to your family's income or assets, it's really easiest just to call SSI. They have a Social Security disability starter kit, which will get you some of the facts on disability for children. If you know you're above the SSI limits, you can simply provide proof of your income, such as paycheck stubs, that SSI denial within the last 90 days, tax returns, bank records, but they don't even need proof. You can just even provide them a statement. So write a note in your application saying that our income and assets are X, and that will suffice for them as well. If you have questions about this, I spoke to the head of the Katie Beckett unit, and she said, call them and they can do a predetermination with you if you think you might be really close to those limits on SSI, and they can walk you through that, because nobody wants you to go through an entire Katie Beckett application and send it in only to see that you're going to qualify for SSI, your child is, because then you can't get Katie Beckett. So that was a big whole lot of waste of time. So again, here's some resources for you to be able to access that information. Also, the Department of Community Health has resources if you have questions about Katie Beckett. You can access Katie Beckett information as well as other forms of Medicaid on here. There are other types of Medicaid other than SSI Medicaid and Katie Beckett. On the Department of Community Health's website, they discuss the eligibility criteria for all of those. I'm not going to go into that in today's webinar. We're really just talking about Katie Beckett Medicaid here today. For quick access to the DMA 6A level of care and cost effectiveness forms, you can also get it online at the link. There are other forms that are required to apply. Please note that not all of the forms are on here, and not all of the forms are current. They will accept the forms that are on the website, but like if your child has autism, there's a place that's missing on the level of care statement, which is new on the form, and it's been updated where you would indicate that they're getting behavioral therapy. I've put together for everybody a copy of their current forms. It's in this packet. I have it on my website as well. And so anybody can go to my website and get the current copies of the blank forms. So I don't ever want to hear anybody, I can't have the forms. Like they're out there, and parent to parent will be making them available for people in the future too who are watching this when you watch the webinar. Another website is the glorious Georgia Gateway website that I hear a whole lot of complaints about. But you can create an account and you can do your initial application on Georgia Gateway. So Georgia Gateway is the statewide system for accessing assistance programs. You can report changes and renew benefits and upload documents there. I've found for initial applications, things are often misrouted going this route. In speaking to the Katie Beckett unit manager, she agrees. She sees a lot of people who do their initial application and try to do it on Gateway. They're entering information not quite right. It goes to wrong departments and they never get it. So, frankly, when you're doing your initial application, it's best to print it and send it directly to the Katie Beckett office. That's my opinion, but I've seen it over and over again. It goes to the wrong places. GAMIS, which is Georgia Medicaid Management Information System, has a wealth of information. Everybody should know about this as well. So once you get Medicaid, you can create an account and get access to items such as your EOBs. Without an account, you can get their manuals and many of the application forms. So one of the things that I've given you is the Katie Beckett manual. There's another important manual for a lot of families, which is the Autism Services Manual for once you have Katie Beckett. Like, that is an important manual to have. There's GAP. There's some of the forms on GAMIS as well. It can be very helpful to read their manuals in detail so you understand what's required and accepted by the Department of Community Health. So, for example, your child may have qualified for Katie Beckett using a certain set of testing, but they may need other testing services before autism services can be approved, because you can get eligibility into the Katie Beckett program under an ICFID level of care with one set of testing, but to get ABA or behavior services approved, once you get Katie Beckett, they need some other testing. So it's important to kind of know and have an understanding of these things because a lot of families get caught blindsided. Many people who hire me to do their formal application assistance, are wanting Katie Beckett for the purposes of ABA therapy. It is a very complicated pathway to kind of look and have an understanding of all of these different testing results. It is one of the biggest things, and I'll go into this a little bit more later, that I see personally, and the Katie Beckett office sees, is people don't send in testing and or the proper testing. And so that's one of the biggest problems. When I'm talking to my clients, a lot of people are saying, well, my doctor said that this is fine. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm happy to talk to your doctor, but it's not. And here's the reasons why. And so I've had a lot of conversations with psychologists and different providers about, what is the testing that is needed, not just for acceptance into the Katie Beckett Medicaid program, but also to get ABA behavioral services once they're approved. It's complicated and it's confusing for many. And it seems, frankly, that the rules are always changing. So, what is TEFRA, Katie Beckett Medicaid? So this is under Section 143 of the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982. What you need to know here is that certain states are allowed to make Medicaid benefits available to children with disabilities who would not ordinarily get it because they are, not eligible for SSI because of their parents' income. Every state has the option of opting in or out of this program. So this is not a portable program. So if you live here and you get Katie Beckett here and you want to move to another state, they may or may not have TEFRA Katie Beckett, and how they administer it or choose to administer it may be different than what we see here in Georgia. So, Katie Beckett is a person. And a lot of people do not realize that. This is a picture of her. She had many medical problems, was hospitalized indefinitely. Julie, her mom, advocated to have her at home. But at that time, there was only an institutional level of care, and she was ineligible for Medicaid. And her parents just worked so hard, and she was able to come home in 1981. And I want to tell everybody, we're saying that, your child must meet an institutional level of care. So this program was named after her. And so when we're thinking about, what this institutional level of care, that can kind of be depressing, right? For a lot of us to be thinking about that and thinking all about what our children can't do rather than what they can do. But Katie required nursing care an hour a day, 5 days a week, 12 hours a day on a ventilator. There are possibilities, right? She graduated from college with a degree. She held several jobs over the years, including was a secretary in a homeless shelter. So, this is an important program, and it doesn't mean that there is not hope for your children. And I want everybody to be reminded of that, because, what we talk about here can oftentimes be a little bit of a downer. What are the basic eligibility criteria? So all of these criteria and conditions have to be met. Have to be under 18, must meet the federal criteria for childhood disability, must meet an institutional level of care. The Medicaid costs for caring for the child at home cannot exceed the appropriate level of institutional care. We'll go into what that is a little bit later. And even though the child may qualify for an institutional level of care, it's appropriate to care for them at home. So if your child is at risk for having issues, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily eligible. It's what are their needs right now, today, when your doctor is, signing those forms and filling out the application. You have to be ineligible for SSI due to income and assets. And you don't have to have a formal denial. You just have to be able to show that you're ineligible. And the child disability determination is completed by Alliant Health Solutions medical review team. So some of the slides that I've included in the presentation come from the Department of Community Health, and you will see their logo typically on the bottom right of their slides. So I just kind of wanted to point that out to you. Here is the information for the centralized Katie Beckett Medicaid team. I've given you their phone number and their fax number. They have 2 addresses. One is the location on Beaver Ruin, and they have a PO box as well. You can send your application into either one. They do have a drop box at the PO box. So either one is just fine. And that's their main telephone, their main telephone number for their office. And they also have a fax number. So they have a team of professionals who are going to review your application to review the level of care eligibility. If you're denied, you can reapply if your child's condition changes, and alternatively, you can appeal. Appealing preserves your rights to eligibility back to the date of the application, or 3 months prior if you had marked that you had unpaid bills. So different situations are better for different people depending on what's going on with your application and what type of a denial you got. So what does the deeming waiver pay for, and some of the general rules? I always tell people to work most effectively. It's a whole lot easier if you don't have an HMO plan. And the reason being is, with an HMO plan, you don't have out-of-network benefits. So with Medicaid, you always have to see a Medicaid provider. And with an HMO plan, you always have to see an HMO provider. Katie Beckett Medicaid is always the payer of last resort. So when you have another insurance, it will be secondary insurance. So to work most effectively, it's easier, again, if you don't have an HMO, because then you have to go in network for that HMO and then find somebody who takes Katie Beckett Medicaid. So think about Kaiser, for example. Well, they have their pharmacy. Well, their pharmacy may not take Medicaid. It's Kaiser Pharmacy. So you would have to get an authorization for them to send you to another pharmacy. So then you could get this. It's just a whole lot more hoops to jump through. You must be seen by Medicaid providers in order for Medicaid to pay. And doctors who order must be either Medicaid providers or what they call OPR providers, that they're allowed to order, prescribe, or refer. So let's just say your pediatrician sends you for some sort of testing. The testing place accepts Medicaid, but your pediatrician is not a Medicaid provider and they're not an OPR provider. Even though that testing facility accepts Medicaid, it's not going to be paid for if your doctor is not a Medicaid provider or an OPR provider. So Medicaid pays for deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance, prescription drugs, therapies, doctor's visits, hospital stays, incontinence products for children 2 and over, dental, vision, durable medical equipment, augmentative communication devices, just a whole bunch of things. I encourage everybody to review the laws, EPSDT, that stands for Early Periodic Screening and Diagnostic Treatment, which covers anybody under 21 regarding what's covered. If you have an HMO, I already said you need to see somebody who's in network for both primary and Medicaid. If you have a PPO, it gives you greater amount of flexibility. You can see somebody in or out of network as long as you go to a Medicaid provider. All right, so during your applications, please don't write in margins. Use blue or black ink. So don't do pink and green and all sorts of things. Do not, and tell your providers this, do not completely black out errors. Mark a single line through the error, initial it, and write on the note. Do not use a whiteout. I hear from people all the time. Their doctor filled out the application and there was whiteout all over it. Don't do that. Only send in medical records within the past year. I suggest you only print on one side of the paper. So does it have to be? No. Do they have a scanner that scans both for the front and the back? Yes. But too many times they get calls from people who printed on both sides of the paper and it's been missed. So my advice is, path of least resistance, can it be done? Sure. Can you send your initial application in through Gateway? Sure. Yeah. Are there oftentimes more problems doing it that way? Absolutely. So my suggestion, print on one side of the paper. Also don't staple it, please. All the applications are scanned in order to be sent for medical review. They do not need to be in a binder. Save your money. I used to tell people to do this in the past, and the Katie Beckett office was like, Debbie, stop telling people to do that. Just send us a nice big old stack of paper. Put your forms on the top and put all your medical documentation up underneath that. And that's all that they need. Please do have your doctor sign. Do not stamp it. They will not accept a stamp. Date each page of the attachments and where indicated, okay? Do make a complete copy of your entire signed application and dated application. So after it's all done, make sure you have a copy of everything, okay? Please read the manual and the instructions and mail your application back via method that gives you a proof of delivery. You could also do a signature. Please know that the Katie Beckett office during COVID hasn't been open. They haven't necessarily been letting people in. So a lot of people used to like to go in there and kind of hand it to them. It's been kind of an on and off, mostly off thing since COVID. Then they're not accepting, visitors, but they do have a drop box. I really prefer that there's a proof of delivery, either via a signature or, many of the mail services allow for that proof of delivery. One more note on signatures. So people always say, right, so your therapy notes have to be signed. So if they are electronically signed by your providers in an approved format, then that is fine. So most of the therapy providers have software programs, and it'll say, electronically signed, and it'll like be a date by it, but you'll see that's very different than somebody typing in a Word document with their signature. Like that's not an appropriate electronic signature. So they will accept electronic signatures for your therapy notes. For your doctor's signature, they will not accept a stamp. So on the application itself, it has to be a true and real signature. People always ask me too, is it fine if I email it to them and they fax it to me? That's fine. Like it doesn't have to be an original. You don't have to send them the original. It just cannot be a stamp. Okay, so a title page is what I have at the very beginning of all applications that I prepare for clients. I think it's a good idea. I'm going to show you a sample of a title page in a little bit. We are going to go over each of these forms in TDEL. So please don't get concerned if this all sounds like Greek to you. And you may hear me kind of repeat some of these things because oftentimes we need to hear things more than once. So like I said, this page acts like a table of contents. It makes it very easy to find the information that you're looking for. In my application, the packet that I prepare for clients, I typically, insert a picture of the child there. Like that's where I like to include it. Put the child's name and date of birth. If it's a renewal, I will also include their Medicaid number. You're going to include these forms. So the DMA 6A, and you're going to have attachments for that. When you get to the DMA 6A form, you'll see that there's very little room to write information. So a lot of this information ends up being repetitive in nature and on other forms as well. So I'm going to teach you ways to do this simpler as an attachment so it doesn't have to be so repetitive. For your doctors in terms of what they're needing to provide. Creating it as an attachment will allow you to save it and use it from year to year, where you simply need to update it and not have to recreate it. Now you're also going to include your TEFRA Katie Beckett Care Plan, which is form number 706. And that's also going to include information from your attachments. And I want again, for you to make sure that you're labeling all of your attachments with your child's name and date of birth and their Medicaid number if they have one. And if your doctor needs to sign all pages of those attachments. They all have to be dated. Your Medicaid application is really not so much based off of your parental input, but it's mainly based off of the documented medical information that you have and what your doctor is stating regarding the requirements of your child. This is your doctor's responsibility in terms of endorsing what level of care your child needs. And this is why they have to assign everything. This is coming from your doctor. You're going to include the TEFRA cost effectiveness form, which is 704, and you may have attachments with this, as well as an order for medically necessary therapies, which your doctor is going to write. I'll give you a sample of one. This can be on their letterhead. It can be signed and dated. I see some doctors put it on a little prescription pad, but again, I suggest that there's a little bit more information on there, which I'll go over when we get to that form. You're going to need, again, the birth certificate and other proof of citizenship is accepted, and there's information for that in the blank Katie Beckett manual. A lot of people ask me for renewals. They're like, Debbie, are you going to be going over renewals? So on initial applications, there's form 94. On renewals, it's form 508. I am not going over the renewal form 508. It's basically asking for financial information, basic demographic information, and there's a lot on there that you just don't need to fill out. If you have questions about that form, call your caseworker. They will help you. There's not a lot. It's pretty straightforward in terms of on that form. If your child has a college savings plan, again, that is a parent-owned asset. It's not a child asset, so don't worry about that. You're also going to need to fill out Form 285 if you have other insurance. This is a third-party liability form, and provide them a copy of your current insurance card. There's some other forms like the privacy policy, declaration of citizen. Yes, I know. Everybody here has a headache and you're spinning and you're like, Debbie, this is sounding Greek. I do not understand this. So again, it's getting it all together and in order properly to help you to avoid denials. Marking one thing wrong on your application can cause a denial. Not including one important piece of information is also can cause a denial. Medicaid records from any of your specialty doctors should also be included, as I talked about earlier, right? I said, gather all of the information. Don't send anything that's over a year old. And for renewals and initial applications, they only require the last 90 days of therapy notes and nursing notes. And they do require the last year if there have been any inpatient hospital admissions. So that does not mean an ER visit, but an admission to the hospital. They need the hospital discharge summaries. So in the packet, they talk about this order of medical necessity. I suggest that diagnoses are listed, medications, frequency and duration of therapies, nursing services. If you have the qualifying scores, so their IQ, adaptive or autism rating scale scores on the psychological or developmental assessment. If the family is receiving medically necessary school therapies, those should be included as well. And we're going to go over in a little bit, and I'll show you an example of what one of these orders might look like. So again, the psychological or developmental assessment is required with your first application and then every 3 years after if your child has one of these diagnoses. If your child doesn't have one of these diagnoses, is not developmentally delayed, and has only nursing levels or hospital level of care, which we'll go into that in a little bit later, a psych is not required or developmental assessment. So, this can be done privately. This can be done through Babies Can't Wait. School systems can provide these evaluations. Just make sure that whoever is signing the evaluation is an approved provider. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit detail later of what that looks like. The providers should be familiar with what's required for testing. I hear all the time, Debbie, I spent $2,000 or $1,500 or whatever it was. And you're telling me it doesn't have the test required for Katie Beckett? And I'm like, yes, I'm telling you it doesn't have the testing that's required for Katie Beckett. They're very specific with what their requirements are. So I will tell you about that. So again, under 6 years of age, so a child 0 to 5 is a developmental assessment. A child 6 and over is a psychological. The testing scores need to be on there versus a narrative. So that is one of the things that is, frankly, often I see. They just say, Johnny's doing poorly. They're not giving standard scores. This is going to be required for all children for the ICF-ID level of care. If the child has autism, some additional testing is required. And particularly if you're thinking about, you might be wanting ABA or behavioral services, some very specific testing is required for that. So remember how I said it needed to be signed and dated with their credentials. So here's a listing of all the credentials of what is accepted by the Department of Community Health. So, it can be a developmental pediatrician or a PhD psychologist, school psychologist, Masters of Ed, MSs, anybody with any of these little initials behind their names as an educational diagnostician. Babies Can't Wait early intervention specialists. I have to tell you, one of the most common problems seen by the Babies Can't Wait evaluations that I see is they are often missing the total or composite score. So I'm seeing a lot of questions pop up in the chat about what is required with those specific testing, and I will get to the testing in just a little bit. What you need to have an understanding here is who is allowed to do the testing for your Katie Beckett eligibility. And so it's one of these individuals. Please note, if your child has autism and you are going to want autism behavior services, it cannot be done by the school. It cannot be done by Babies Can't Wait. You're going to need to get a private evaluation. They will not accept that for authorization for that. Okay. So this slide is part of the documentation that the centralized Katie Beckett office sends with all applications. So this is what is required. What is a developmental evaluation? Again, they're saying cannot be for a child, that the evaluation cannot be more than 3 years of age, right? That's for both that and the psychological. The developmental is for a child 0 to 5. These are the people who can do it. What is required on this evaluation? It's standard scores, right? Or age equivalents in the 5 domains. So these are the 5 domains that they're looking for. Again, it's not required, but you should have a total or composite score, because that's also one of the things of how they can look at for eligibility for your child. That's often missing on some of those Babies Can't Wait evaluations. And I also see that often missing on school evaluations. That's not oftentimes done. Psychological evaluation. Oops, sorry. Where was I? Let me find that slide again. A psychological evaluation is for children 6 and older, again, who are applying for an ICFID level of care because they have an intellectual developmental disability. It can be completed by any of these providers listed. There are several components that are required. So it has to contain an IQ score. Okay, that's one of the requirements. Well, what if the child refused to do testing and they could not get an IQ score? Well, the doctor is going to document that they attempted to do the testing, but they were unable to participate and they were unable to do the IQ score. It is what it is, and they will certainly consider that. They also are required to have adaptive functioning testing, okay? That is different than a developmental assessment, which also has an adaptive rating scale score and some of that testing. So that's very different testing. And it include an overall composite score on that adaptive testing. And then when the child has autism, you should also be including the autism rating scale reports. So they're always saying that a psychological or developmental evaluation is always required when it's an ICF. It's now changed to ID level of care, and or the behavioral status on number 3 of the DMA-6 is anything other than alert and or cooperative. And so you'll see what that means when we get to that form. So if anything else is checked, you always have to have a psychological or developmental assessment. And it's always for kids who's applying under ICFID level of care. And again, all testing can be used that is considered current if it was done within the last 3 years. If your child has an IEP or an IFSP, they are, this is required to be sent in. It needs to be current. If your child attends private school or is homeschooled, you're going to be noting this in the level of care document. Again, you need to submit this for the current school year, not a draft. They used to tell people that they required signatures on it. They don't. I confirmed that with their office, unless you're using the IEP to show the testing, and then it has to be signed with the credentials of the evaluator. So, but as just a general rule, no, you do not need signatures on that document. So what is an IFSP? This is an optional program with Babies Can't Wait. And this document's required if the child has a disability and is enrolled in the program with early intervention services, so birth to age 3. And your plan dates have to reflect your current plan dates because Babies Can't Wait, they're constantly updating their plans. So your IFSP that you give to Katie Beckett to review needs to be current. Frequent problems that I see with my clients' evaluations. So, right, I help people get their applications together for Katie Beckett. Biggest issue, the evaluation is too old. It's more than 3 years old. Or their child is now 8 and their evaluation is from 3 years ago and it was a developmental assessment. But now that their child's 8, they need a psychological evaluation. So not going to work. It is not signed with the appropriate credentials. The evaluator has not done the DCH required testing appropriate for the age of the child. I see this all the time, particularly for children under 6. I see lots of testing and lots of good stuff, and the evaluators are some really beautiful and wonderful evaluations that give a lot of positive and meaningful information to the families, but it doesn't include the required testing. So what was that required testing? Well, I went over it on that form that's in your handout from the Katie Beckett office, and it's a developmental assessment in 5 domain areas. Okay. And also that total or composite score is not listed. So that's something that I see that's problematic as well. So what does the Katie Beckett unit see with applications and their problems? Because I asked them, I was like, okay, what do you want me to tell everybody when I do this webinar? You know, what is the biggest thing that you see? And she said the biggest issue is people not sending in required testing. People are just sending in applications and not including testing, okay? And not sending in what they request or is required. So, you know, they'll give you a list of things that is needed and they're not getting something. So somebody is missing something. So remember when I said, get all of your information together, all of that information that I told you is everything that Katie Beckett is going to require. Not sending information in a timely manner, what happens? So during COVID, there's been a different set of rules. They give you 30 days for the first checklist. And then second days for the second checklist, like if you're missing information and you send it in. During non-COVID, they give you 20 days for the first checklist that they send you, hey, we need X, Y, and Z. And they give you 10 days for the second checklist. They wanted me to, reassure everybody, we are in a state of emergency right now due to COVID. They're not kicking people off. Right now, this is, at a federal level, and they are giving extensions. You just have to ask for it. So, don't panic, like if this is a renewal, but also if you're sending in a new application and they're wanting you to give you this stuff, they'll send you this checklist. You need to give it back to them because without it, they can't complete your application. So if you've not sent in a psych, and you don't have one, and it's 4 months now until you can get an appointment, you're going to need to just send in a new application. They're not going to just kind of keep on giving you those extensions. So here's some tips and caseworker information. The centralized office has a customer service worker, is what they call them, who currently rotates. And this is with their staff who takes turns, who answers the call. So kind of everybody, or I don't know everybody, but they all take turns answering the calls. So when you call their office, it can be a different person depending on the day. And what can these people do? They can email you an application. They can process extension requests for renewals. They can help you change mailing address information if you were unable to do it on Gateway. So you are supposed to do it on Gateway, but sometimes it's hard. People don't understand Gateway. People get locked out of Gateway. Various reasons they're not able to do it. You can call their office and they can help you with that. A lot of people have insurance changes at the beginning of the year. And with that, you're going to need to fill out a new form, a DMA 285. And we'll go over that form in a little bit. And that's going to need to be sent to them, to their office, and they can help you with that as well. The caseworker who helps you in your initial application, like who does the telephone interview with you and sends your file to Alliant for medical review, will likely not be your caseworker after approval. So caseworkers can change from year to year. So in the past, you used to be assigned to one person, and you may have had that person for many, many, many years. They've changed their model, and now it is being rotated up. So you never know who is going to be your caseworker at that moment in time, and who is handling your case initially to kind of get it sent and until you're approved is likely going to be somebody different who's then going to be handling your case, let's say 6 months from now. Let's say you were approved today, 6 months from now, if you call, your caseworker would be a different person, likely. If you call the office for renewal paperwork and you're sent the information and have a deadline that does not have a caseworker name, that means that you have not been assigned to a caseworker. So don't panic. Don't worry. That's fine. It means that whoever calls will be able to help you, and it hasn't been assigned to somebody. So the customer service worker who answers the phone can grant you an extension, if you need one. And again, if you have questions regarding the application, required documents, Social Security determination information, call them. They're happy to help. I spoke, like I said, to Ms. Sermons, who is the manager over the Katie Beckett unit. She is very helpful, and she and their model is, and she's said, these are our customer service reps, and I want them to be able to help and to be helpful to people who are have questions. So like if you're not sure, like what does something mean or what do they need, just ask, and they can help. So, all right, deep breath here. Now I want to go into the different level of care requirements. And this is going to be one of the most confusing parts of the presentation. So I am going to apologize in advance. So you're going to have to bear with me. Take a deep breath and try and relax, and know that most of this information is online and in the packets that I've given you. So you do not have to remember everything that I'm telling you. As I mentioned earlier, everybody's question to me is always wondering if their child is going to be approved or denied. And it's all based on the level of care criteria and documentation that you provide. And these are the things that I work through and discuss with my clients, who hire me to assist them, because it's quite a confusing process. I'm going to say this several times in this webinar. Everybody who has a child with a disability should apply. Even if your child does not meet level of care criteria, please apply, because getting a level of care denial will grant you access to other funding options. And that is money in your pocket and in your child's pocket to be able to help them. The Department of Community Health has their interpretation of the Code of Federal Regulations criteria. Alliant is going to make a determination if your child meets level of care guidelines. That's what this is all about. Does your child meet level of care guidelines? There is an appeals process set forth if you are denied. And I do suggest that you consult with an attorney who specializes in these appeals if you're going to be appealing your decision. You're like, no, absolutely, my child should be approved. And I filled out this application. My doctor, put all the proper things and they meet the level of care, and you want to go to a hearing. Well, this is a legal proceeding. So for legal proceedings, I suggest you consult with a legal person regarding that. Frankly, some people call me, I'm like, your child doesn't qualify. I can see, right now your child doesn't qualify. So if you decide you want to go to a hearing, you need to kind of have an understanding of that. What are the rules of evidence to get evidence in, so on and so forth. there are going to be 3 levels of care that are discussed, right? So there's nursing, hospital, and ICFID level of care, which again stands for intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disability. The vast majority of applications that I see are for that ICFID level of care, and that's what we're going to be spending the most time on today. I want everybody to know that hospital level of care was removed from the Department of Community Health application forms, and most references, not all, were removed from the current manual. Again, attorneys that I've spoken with regarding this matter have told me that the Code of Federal Regulations, which is what all of this is based off of, clearly outlines the hospital level of care. And if this is a level of care that your physician feels your child requires, they should indicate this on the forms. They should write it in, as well as in the paperwork that is submitted to them. So again, it's really confusing. I want to show you a then versus now. So I want to show you level of care charts that were in the DCH manuals in 2015 versus 2022. Remember how I say things change? And so I want to give you some of these examples as we go through here so you can have an understanding of what I'm saying here. This is what they had in their manual in 2015 for a hospital level of care. Again, this is now removed. If your doctor feels that your child meets this level of care, again, it should be indicated on the forms. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I just want you to show you this is 2015 nursing level of care. We have a lot of information and a great amount of detail that was in the Department of Community Health manual. So I want you to see how much was included in their information. Here we go. Continue to go. Now, this was the ICFID level of care in 2015. Please note that in 2015, it referred to that a child could qualify based off of an IQ of 50 or below. Also, they said that on their adaptive functioning scores, it was less than 70. Okay, so that's a couple of things here that I want to point out. I also want to point out in 2015, they referenced therapies so that the child must, in their plan of care, show participation of at least 5 days a week of interventions, which are required to correct or ameliorate the conditions or diagnosis that are compatible with the acceptable professional practices in light of the condition at the time of treatment. So all of this was noted in the DCH manual in 2015, okay? So now let's go over our current manuals. So this is what you need to have an understanding of what's going on today. So I said at the beginning, things change, right? So depending on what day you ask me, things may look differently. So again, no hospital level of care. And as I said before, attorneys who represent families in appeals cases say if your provider feels that they need a hospital level of care, they should indicate this on the application. And that's in the Code of Federal Regulations. I would like to go over the nursing level of care for children. So it's really, frankly, pretty simple. So this is level of care based off of an overall medical condition of the individual and medically necessary services. So level of care, again, is not diagnosis specific. So it's appropriate for kids or individuals who do not require hospital care, but who on a regular basis require licensed nursing services, rehab services, or other services ordinarily provided in an institution. So with respect to an individual who has a mental illness or intellectual disability, nursing services are usually inappropriate. So if they have those other things going on, unless that individual's mental health needs are secondary, or they have a more acute physical disorder. So these are the conditions that a nursing level of care would be appropriate for. And if they also receive these services in an educational setting, they meet the same conditions. So the service has to be ordered by a physician, has to be furnished either directly by or under the direct supervision of appropriately licensed personnel. The services are so complex, right, that it has to be safely and effectively performed only by or under the supervision of technical or professional personnel, such as RNs, LPNs, PTs, OTs, speech pathologists, audiologists, autism service providers. And, okay, so this is where the references to the therapies in the current manual, that nursing services are required 7 days per week, or skilled rehab services at least 5 days per week. All right, so now I'm going to spend a good bit of time reviewing the intermediate care facility level of care carefully. Okay. And again, these are based off of the Code of Federal Regulations as the Department of Community Health. This is the Department of Community Health level of care criteria. And it's based off of the overall medical condition of individuals and medically necessary services required. And again, just as it is with the nursing level of care, it's not diagnosis specific. So when people ask me, Debbie, my child has a diagnosis of X, do they qualify for Katie Beckett? I said, I don't know. It's not diagnosis specific. So DCH again says that their level of care is appropriate for individuals who require the type of active treatment typically provided by a facility whose primary purpose is to furnish health and rehab services to people with ID or related conditions. And so it's generally indicated if one of the following conditions are met. Okay, so you see that some things are different here, and I've highlighted them from the one from several years ago. The IQ has a child has an IQ of 70 or below. Remember, it used to say 50. So now that has changed. This is, again, DCH's interpretation. And so this is beneficial for a lot of families. Many more children can qualify. Then we have an OR, okay? The child has a standard score of at least 3 of the 5 domains of function of 70 or below on a standardized developmental assessment tool, or an overall standard score of 70 or below. So again, this is for that criteria is for children who are under 6, right? Because those developmental assessments are required for children under 6. You see here in this guideline where they talk about that overall standard score. So where I say that many people's evaluations are missing on those kiddos under 6 is they're not reporting that overall standard score. I see that many kids qualify because that overall standard score is less than 70, but they are not 2 standard deviations below in 3 areas. So 70 or below in 3 areas, they don't meet it based off of that, but they meet it off of that overall standard score. That's why that's kind of important to be included in that assessment. If a child has a standard score of 70 or below in at least 3 domains of function on adaptive functioning assessment tools, or an overall composite score of 70 or below. The one from a few years ago said less than 70, so a little bit of a wording change there. And then they have a CAR score above 37 or a GAR score above 121. And again, those are severe autism scores. And again, this is required every 3 years for a psychological, and they're either a developmental assessment, so an age-appropriate evaluation, which they have indicated. So what I'm told by attorneys is that the Code of Federal Regulations refer to the requirement of active treatment. And so for an ICFID level of care, there's not a requirement for therapies of 5 days per week. We saw that it is listed in the manual under nursing, either 5 days of rehab or 7 of nursing. We see that it's not listed here in this ICFID level of care. In January of 2016, me and a group of interested parties submitted questions to the Department of Community Health. And one of the questions that was asked was, for an ICFID level of care, can a child qualify by either meeting the criteria in column A, B, or C, or in the level of care? And we were basically just asking like one or the other, like, could they qualify based off of their this testing that we have right here, or did they also have to get that therapy? Because you remember therapy was listed in that one from 5 years ago. And they said, no, per the manual and instructions, an ICF-MR is what they refer to it, level of care, is generally indicated if one of the conditions on column A is satisfied, in addition to column B and C. And so at that time, they were denying lots and lots and lots of children for not having 5 therapies per week for this level of care at the time of their initial applications or renewal. So now in 2022, the language from the DCH is no longer in their document about requiring 5 days a week of intervention. And I am seeing them currently consistently approve children who are not receiving 5 times a week therapies at the time of their initial applications, who have testing scores indicated in this level of care chart that we have here. So what I'm trying to say here is that, I've personally been told that the guidance has always been based off of the CFR. The Code of Federal Regulations hasn't changed, but the manuals and the practice have. So it can be a bit of a moving target. Attorneys who work in appeals, do tell me that there is no requirement for 5 therapies a week, only requirements for children requiring active treatments. So I want to go through our forms, and we are going to give you a sample Katie Beckett packet. Again, this is just a sample. This is your child's packet. If you're a provider on here that you're filling out for, your patients, you need to do what is medically indicated for your child. I'm going through this. This is not advice. Rather, this is an example of the information that can be included on a packet. So we're going to walk through this and show you what it is. So here we are. We have this cover page that I talked about earlier. Again, we have the child's name and their address and phone numbers and parent contact information. We've dated it. We are sending in the information of the child's name. Again, want to show you, we've listed all of the forms that we have included in the application. And then we're also listing all of the supporting documents that we've included, including the level of care form, orders for medical necessities, proof of SSI denial, all of these other things that we're including. And then the parent is going to sign it because, obviously it's the parent who's compiling and gathering all of this information. Okay, here is Form 94, which is your Medicaid application. This is for any type of Medicaid. TEFRA Katie Beckett Deeming Waiver. I do suggest you write that on here so they know what is required. In this first field here, people always get this wrong. This is the child's name, okay? And then you're going to put all of your mailing address information, parent telephone numbers here. The child, so who wants Medicaid? Again, when you're filling out Medicaid applications, the applicant is the child. So this is the child's name, date of birth, their social security number. If they're a citizen, it has to be yes, okay, for the child. And do the parents live in the home? And this is everybody else who lives in the home. Sometimes we have to write double names in here to make it fit. The information that I want you to understand here at the bottom is asking if you have any unpaid bills. So if you say yes, that you have unpaid bills and the months of what they are, they will make your Medicaid application back effective to October. Like, let's say, today's application date is January 10th. So they'll make it effective back to October if you say yes. If it's no, if you're approved, it'll be effective January 1st. They want to know if you have any other health insurance. And I'm sorry, it did not get put on here, but also they want to know the insurance name and policy number, which I typically include here at the bottom as well. On the second page of this form, so if you have an SSI denial level, or you're providing proof of SSI ineligibility or a statement to them, you do not have to fill out this section. You can just make sure your child doesn't have income or assets more than $2,000 in their name. It's going to disqualify them. So if they don't have any of that, right, Katie Beckett application, child doesn't have income or assets, see attached for proof of SSI ineligibility. And again, that proof can be many things, including just a statement from you. And then this is obviously going to need to be signed at the bottom. And I'm sorry, this also was a mistake here, and we would be marking these boxes here at the bottom that you are checking here and here at the bottom, just above the signature. All right, so I know we've been at this seminar for some time now, and if you need a little sensory break, now might be a good time to stretch, because I'm going to need your full attention here on this form. I refer to this form as the Holy Grail, as otherwise known as the DMA 6A for pediatric care. So at the top of the screen here, you see we've marked Tefra Katie Beckett, your child's name, the county that they live in. So again, Fulton, DeKalb, whatever that county is, and your complete mailing address. Field number 2, if your child doesn't have Medicaid, you would put new application. We do not want you to be leaving boxes blank. If they've had Medicaid in the past, but no longer do, include that number, because they will grant you Medicaid and they will continue and give you with that same number. Number 3 is your child's social security number. 4, 5, and 6 is relevant information regarding sex, age, and birth date. Number 5, they want to know your primary care physician and the applicant's phone number. That would be your phone number. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about number 7. So it says, in the caretaker's opinion, would the child require an institutionalization if the child did not receive community services? So they've changed this question in previous forms, which is good. I prefer the way that this is worded now. You have to say yes, because that's basically what you're saying. Is you're saying that your child, absent of you providing services for your child, if they did not receive these services, they would require institutionalization if you were not able to be there to take care of them, that they require that level of care. That's what Katie Beckett is all about, saying that they require that level of care, not meaning that you're going to send your kid to an institution. You're not saying that, but it's saying that they require that level of care. Number 8, you're going to mark yes or no if they're in school or even in preschool is fine. There's lots of places where we have a date. Again, do not date the applications until your doctor has signed the form and you are ready to mail it. I see some people do it and get the doctors and sign it, and then they're sitting on it for 2 months before they get around to mailing it for whatever reason. Don't do that. It's old. They have to process applications within 90 days. So date it when you're ready to mail it. Who are the caregivers in your household who are taking care of the child? And then again, it's going to be signed and then dated when you're ready to mail it. All right, so the history. We're going to show you what that attachment is because it's just too much to write here, and several of the forms require the history. Then we have the diagnoses, as well as these codes to the right. These are ICD-10 codes. And so the top 3 diagnoses relevant to the child would be listed here. And we're going to list all of the other ones on another page for an attachment. This is the bottom of that first page of the DMA-6. Again, the child's medications, what type of diagnostic and treatment procedures. I'm going to go into detail of what that looks like on that attachment. And our treatment plan, I also want to show you what that looks like on the attachment. Hospitalizations, number 17, if it's not applicable, mark that. And what level of care is recommended. Again, nursing or ICFID. This is where your doctor would indicate hospital if they felt hospital as well. If you're applying under ICFID level of care, you're going to mark that one. What type of application is this? Is this the first time? You're going to mark initial. If you're changing level of care, maybe you were nursing and you're choosing now, your doctor's choosing ICFID, that one would be marked. And if it's continued placement, so it's your renewal, you'd mark continued placement. Most of our kiddos live at home. So in this example, that's what was marked here. And for this individual, it's a permanent disability, and they are free of communicable diseases, and it can be managed by community and home health, and the doctor's name and address, and they are going to have to sign it. Again, not a stamp. The date that the doctor did that is, which is when you're like ready to mail it. I always tell people, like, let's not date it until you're ready to mail it. We're going to put their license number and the physician's phone number. Nutrition. So what's going on with the child's nutrition? You're going to mark the appropriate box for this, and whatever is appropriate for this child, only eats pureed food. So that was indicated. They are incontinent over 3 for this example, and not much is going on for cardiopulmonary status. So that for this child is just getting room air. And then this kid has some splints, so maybe some AFOs and not able to ambulate. Their behavioral status. So remember when we said nursing level of care, it could just be alert or cooperative. And if anything else is marked, you have to have a psychological. So for this child, as an ICFID level of care, we marked what was applicable for this child, and if there are behavior problems, indicate it and, talk about what they might be. If this child had, no skin issues in number 34, we would just be marking normal. But again, your doctor needs to be marking every single box. What I see on these forms, oftentimes people want me to review forms that their doctors have prepared. I'm like, oh my gosh, like half of this is missing. They haven't filled it out. Like it's not in there. It's not complete. All of this needs to be complete. For urogenital, so, frequently what I most see, is the child incontinent over 3, or are they continent? So if the child is 1, right, and in diapers, it would be continent, right? If they're 3 or over and having accidents, then that would be marked. How many surgeries has the child had is number 36. Most of our kiddos requiring an ICFID level of care are needing high-tech services. Seizures, this child has, and neurological deficits. And the vast majority of kids require therapies or other therapy visits 5 days per week, I would say, in terms of what I'm seeing. If there's specific needs of your child that don't fit into a certain box, have your doctor indicate that on the form. So, if they're requiring, full assistance, but they're, having appropriate bowel movements, fine. But if they're requiring assistance for cleaning or something like that, again, you can indicate that. So nobody's saying that it just has to be exactly as it's worded here. Under remarks, I do suggest that we put their psychological testing as well. I think it's just another nice place for them to see it. 41 would be if they're going into the hospital for this child, we put NA because they didn't have a pre-search. And again, it's going to be signed and dated by the doctor and or physician. Okay, so our attachment. So the things that I want to point out specifically on this attachment, right? So it's dated. We're talking about what it is, right? It's an application, what the child's name is, their date of birth, what's going on with them. I believe in your handout, I don't think it got updated on this slide here, but I do have attachment indicating that it's attachment. If they do have Medicaid, go ahead and put their Medicaid number. And again, everything needs to be signed and dated. So that's going to be on the bottom of every page of your attachment. Here's a list. Like this kiddo has a whole bunch of different diagnoses. Like they're all going to be listed. The Katie Beckett unit only requires like the first 3 to include the ICD-10 codes. Remember, you've gotten copies of your child's medical records. You should have the codes because they should be in there of all the other ones. Go ahead and include them. Many pediatricians are very happy for you to kind of help and provide them to get this documentation together. And of course, they're going to review it and authorize it. But many times, like it's incomplete. Like I just see terribly, incomplete applications. There's a lot. The DMA-6 also lists areas for medications. I do want to briefly kind of touch on the history. You do not need to have a 10-page history on your child, but a brief history about what's been going on with them, what the delays are, what sort of needs they may have, what sort of active treatment your child may require. If things are not kind of fitting in other areas, you can certainly include this in the history statement. So that number on the DMA-6, diagnostic and treatment procedures. So what does that mean, right? So that might be that your child needs an MRI or an EEG or lab work. They may need assistance with feeding or stretching or dressing and toileting assistance. So those are all sorts of kind of active daily treatments that your child needs. Maybe they need an endoscopy or colonoscopy or mobility assistance. So this is the area that this is going to be indicated on the DMA-6. In the treatment plan, the first section is hospitalizations. They only require you to put the last year, but I think it's helpful to kind of have an ongoing list. And they only require hospitalizations, but I also like to include other procedures or outpatient things that kind of show the medical complexity of a child. But again, the only thing that they do require is inpatient hospitalizations and those discharge summaries. And then for this kid, we wrote, what is needed for the child in terms of their rehab services. And so for this child, he was getting, and it was medically necessary for this child to have PT at school twice a week. He needed private physical therapy. And you see, I put a little asterisk there. And at the bottom, this child currently isn't receiving these ordered and necessary therapies due to costs. And so we explained why he wasn't getting them, or maybe the child's on a wait list or some other things going on. There's not a provider in the area. And so I like to indicate and have the doctor indicate what is required, but for whatever reason, the child is not getting this. All right, so this next form is the level of care statement, and you'll see that attachment kind of included some of these things as well. So again, the member name is the child's name. It's their date of birth. their social security number, and their diagnoses. We put the first 3 here, and then we want to have them see the attachment for the other diagnoses. For this child, again, was applying for ICFID level of care. And look, they've asked for the history again. So do you want to write that history all over? No, we can just have them see the attachment. This middle section is frankly really more designed for a skilled nursing level of care. But if your child doesn't have skilled nursing needs, but still has needs in other areas, I do like to indicate, what those needs are. So people get confused how to fill that out. You're going to mark an X under if there's none. And if they do have needs, you're going to include that in the right. So whatever those needs are, this child had some absent and drop seizures and required some observation with nutrition. Food had to be pureed. The child was at risk for aspiration with thin liquids. So thicket was used. All of these sorts of kind of detailed care descriptions of what's needed for the child would go here. And then I also like to, list again what other therapeutic services are required. This middle section right underneath that where it says therapy, attach current notes. This is what is your child receiving today? So as of the date of this application, so your application is dated January 10th. So today, what is your child getting? Not 3 weeks from now, because you're on a wait list and they have an opening and you're going to start it. But today that you're showing, and you're going to be sending in your last 90 days of notes, what can you show proof of that you're currently getting? This is a big area that people always write the wrong information. They oftentimes write kind of what is ordered, but that's not what you write here. This section right here is right, what is the child needing? So hospitalizations, again, within the last 12 months, and you're going to put those dates. You might be seeing that attachment. So is the child in school? Yes or no? How many hours, days? Do they have an IEP or IFSP? If it's not applicable, you'd mark no. Is there a nurse in attendance? People ask, is there a preschool? Yes. Like I believe that counts as school. It's a preschool. Many kids are in pre-K programs, starting preschool programs starting at 3, for example. You can have a public school system. So yes, if the child doesn't have an IEP or IFSP or doesn't have one of those things and you've marked yes, just put a note on the application indicating, private preschool. And let them know. And again, the doctor is going to sign it, you're going to sign it, and you're going to be dating it when you're mailing that application. Your doctor needs to write an order of medical necessity for services. So again, this can be on their prescription pad or on their letterhead, any of those things. It's going to include the date and their name, their Medicaid number, if they have one. This one is a new application. And we've written exactly what was on that attachment earlier. What are they getting now? What do they need that they're not getting? And why are they not getting it? So all of that is being listed here for this child. And this child, the doctor wrote talking about their needs and requiring daily active treatment, needing assistance with most activities of daily living and dressing and toileting, all of those different things. The doctor is going to list their diagnoses and including what the last testing was is my suggestion, and talking about how they meet the requirements for Katie Beckett. So can you fit all of that on a little prescription pad? Probably not if you have a complex kid. But I think, providing full information about the scope of the needs of your child is helpful to get appropriate level of care determination. Now, this cost effectiveness form, going to be really quick here about this, basic demographic information on the top again. But what you need to know here is that in their current manual, the skilled nursing facility level of care, the average cost is like about $6,300, and the ICFID is about $14,000. So because this application is less than or is for an ICFID, the total to qualify for Katie Beckett, because right, they say to qualify, it has to be cost effective. So that's kind of the purpose of this form. Is it cost effective for Medicaid? And they want to know the costs of the estimated costs of the monthly Medicaid services. So your doctor, is going to be filling that out in terms of what do they think their costs are. If they don't know the therapy, your therapist can provide the estimated costs of their numbers. And then on the bottoms in the comments section, I think it's helpful, and they suggest this in their manual as well, and in their instruction sheet, to put the portion of what your primary insurance is going to pay, so they have an understanding of that. It's required that you mark yes on this form. Will home care be as good or better than institutional care? That's one of the requirements that we went over earlier for Katie Beckett. And again, it's going to need to be signed and dated. Really quick declaration of citizenship, child's name, city, state, and country, and that they are a citizen. Parent needs to sign it. The bottom, the adult seeking benefits of this form is blank. A lot of people tends to fill that out. This is the Department of Community Health. This is if you have an employer-sponsored health insurance. If you do not have an employer-sponsored health insurance, you do not need to fill out this form. The head of household is the primary insurance holder. That's what I want to point out here at the top of this form. And the referral source, this is typically just the person who is completing the form. This is information about the policy. I'm not going to go into details. You're just going to enter this information. They want to know who are the Medicaid eligible people. So that's the child here in this middle. Do any of the people have been diagnosed with the medical condition? Yes, that's your child's name, and you're going to, fill in what that is. They need to know what are the costs of the premium. So for this person, they're paid once a month, and what comes out of their paycheck is $400 once a month. Let's say that they are paid semi-monthly. So then that amount could be $200, right? So if they get 2 checks and a total of a month, it's at $200 or monthly at $400. So it's what comes out of each paycheck. That's what they're asking here of the premiums, and how frequently is it? What are the services that are covered under this person's policy? And again, it's going to be signed and dated. This is the third-party liability policy. So again, case name, all applicants, right? This is the child's name, child's address, name, city, phone number. Case number. If this is an initial application, you're probably not going to have one. If this is a renewal, you would look on your sheet that they've mailed you, and you may have a case number. That's the number that you would put there. If you don't, you can put NA. So what type of case is this? So this one is a new one, right? So this is an initial application. People say, well, what do I do for a renewal? We'll cross out initial and write renewal. For this person, they have a third-party liability insurance. So we're marking HIP referral. So that's, again, only if you have an employer-sponsored health insurance. And we're going to mark HIP referral for that if you do. This is the question that everybody gets confused about. Says, do you? So who are they asking? You is the child. Do you have a private group or government health insurance? No. So the child does not. But in this case, the parent does. So does your spouse, parent, or step-parent have a private group or health insurance? Yes. In this case, the parent has health insurance. And the policyholder is not an absent parent. That would be like perhaps in a divorce situation or something like that. Who's covered in the household? You're just going to be filling out the appropriate information here. Everybody gets this confused here. Again, anybody have a chronic medical condition? Yes, it's the child. What's their condition? You're going to fill out the health insurance, what type of coverage, sign it. And again, it's going to be dated when you're ready to mail it. It's the member or authorized person, an insured or authorized person at the bottom there. I did not include all pages of the HIPAA form. There's 6 pages long. I just included the last page in the presentation, but each parent in the household of the child needs to sign that. So if your application's completed, now what? So if all forms are dated, they're ready to mail, scan a copy of it for yourself, mail it to the Katie Beckett office, and then wait anxiously. The Katie Beckett review team receives the application. They're going to do a telephone interview with you. They're going to send it to Alliant for medical reviews, and then decisions are based on one of 3 levels of care. Hospital, again, that was kind of removed, nursing or ICFID, and all of their letters are going to talk about what levels of care. The medical review team is required a decision within 90 days, either an approval, a level of care denial, or a technical denial when the applicant is approved. So yay, whoops. So when you're approved, Alliant is going to mail the family a final determination letter. So yay, we're very happy. But on that letter, they really try and confuse you, and they give you a Medicaid ID number, and that is not the child's Medicaid number. So yes, I know it's confusing. This whole process is confusing. That's just one of the things that I always get 8 million questions about. But it is what it is. It often takes a week or 2 for you to become active in the system. You can ask any of your providers to look you up in their portal to see when you become active. At that point in time, they can start billing Medicaid. And if you have issues with this or not getting your Medicaid card in the mail, contact the Katie Beckett office and they can help you. Typically, it takes about 1 week, sometimes 2, to be able to get that. So you're going to celebrate after you're approved for sure. Next steps, go on Gateway, create an account for your child. Go on GAMAS. Remember, I told you about that earlier. Also, create an account. You can take a look and see your child's Medicaid paid claims on GAMAS. Ask your providers to file claims for you retroactively. You cannot file any claims yourself. My understanding is providers are not required to do so, and you cannot get your money back on anything that requires a prior authorization, and many things require prior authorization, such as ABA therapy. Certain therapies over a certain amount per month require PA, so you can't ever get that back retroactively. If you've been approved, you need to follow up on your HIP application. If you had that third party employer sponsored health insurance with HIP, it's wonderful that they pay for the cost of your employer sponsored health insurance, but it has to be cost effective. If you're denied for that program, there's another program called CHIPRA, and you can contact their office to see and follow up. Typically, I do find it does take them multiple weeks after you've been approved before HIP kind of gets that application. And then there's a second part of that application that you're going to have to fill out, including something from your employer, sending EOBs, so on and so forth. Want to be really quick here on renewals. So there's a 1 year is a brief renewal that can be done on Gateway. That's 1 year after your approval of your initial application kind of approval date. 2 years is a full renewal where they have to do medical review. That's a form 508 instead of 94. Some of the other forms are not required. Similar information is required for those renewals. Gateway only indicates information about when your renewal is due for brief. It does not tell you information about what is your level of care, which is frankly, and your medical review, which is frankly what people really care about, because that's all the work, right? That's getting the therapy notes and getting the IEP and getting the hospital discharge summaries and having an updated psych if you need one. During COVID, they have been giving automatic extensions on brief renewals, so you can check your date on that in Gateway. And in talking to the Katie Beckett office, they're not notified when full renewals are due by Gateway. They have to actually specifically run reports, and it's not automatically linked. So there's like a whole bunch of people who are way behind in terms of that it's time for them for that full medical review that just frankly were not done. But definitely call our office for questions. What do you do if you're not approved, right? So remember how I said that there's other funding. So if you get a level of care denial, you can get funding through Champions for Children. Currently, that's worth about $3,000 a year. Really simple application. I have to be denied for Katie Beckett under 21, living at home. Have to have, one of these disabilities. Call them. And get an application. So super simple. And it's money that you would not be getting if you had not applied for Katie Beckett and did not get that level care denial. You could receive an initial determination letter from Katie Beckett. And so that could mean either a level of care denial or a technical denial. There are some examples of this in the DCH manual. They've changed their processes to try and avoid missing information. This is why they do telephone interviews to give families an opportunity to kind of submit that information before they kind of get that initial technical denial. So we're not seeing as many of those right now. But that could be because you were, missing paperwork. A level of care denials because Alliant determined that your child did not meet level of care requirements for the program. And their notice is going to include their reasons why. You have 30 days to submit appeals. Don't be late in sending it in. If you do, you're just SOL. And if additional information isn't sent in, the decision becomes final. So then when that becomes final, you get that final determination letter. Either, again, it was due to technical or level of care denial. And you can request a fair hearing in writing within 30 days. And again, this is where I suggested you talk to an attorney. Follow all instructions provided to you. And some families decide not to appeal and simply submit a new application depending on what's appropriate with your specific situation. I do encourage all families, again, to go to my website. You were given a link for this in your handout packet to get Navigating the Maze. Again, tons of other money out there for you. There's additional money that I want people to really know about as well, which is family support and respite. This is via DBHDD. And if you go to this website, they will give you lists of providers by county. And you could just Google DBHDD family support. And this is currently for children 4 and over who have any of these diagnoses. And they give like respite services, family education, depending on the vendor of who you're dealing with is different things of what they pay for. And the amount is based off of the state budget. So our state is divided into 6 regions. So you'll see here a map in terms of your county and what region you are. You can contact your regional office by calling any of these numbers. And again, this information is all on the DBHDD website. With that, you can then apply for additional waivers like the Now waiver and the Comp waiver and GAP. You have to be Medicaid eligible in order to get any of those waivers. But I do want you to, briefly have an understanding and know what it is and know what's out there. So on DBH, our Department of Community Health's website, they have some information about, what is the Now and Comp waiver and what are things that it pays for. So I always like to think of it as kind of like Medicaid plus. So yes, you have Medicaid, but then it pays for all of these additional things. So it may pay for, community access or community guide services or living services and support. And the dollar amount is based off of what type of waiver you get. Then there's the gap waiver, which a lot of people have misinformation about. A lot of people think that it is just skilled nursing. It's not, it's skilled and unskilled. So I know a lot of younger kids who may have a whole lot of adaptive needs, may have some care needs, bathing, feeding, so on and so forth. That's not necessarily a skilled nursing care. It certainly is a personal support care. GAP can do this. The GAP manual, again, is on the GAMIS website, and you would apply through the individual nursing agencies, which are listed in their manual. And I know Parent to Parent has a whole lot more information, but I do want everybody to know about it and be aware of it. Unfortunately, we're in a shortage, and it's very difficult to get nursing services and find staffing, but this is a waiver program in addition. And so I do want people to know about it. Want to show you really quickly what does a now comp waiver application look like. This is the first page. It's very limited information that you need. Your psych, proof of citizenship, Social Security or Medicare card, Social Security benefit information, if there's guardian documents, if there's an IEP, a release of information. And then this form, which is basically name, address, phone number, Social Security number, who's the primary contact, what's the legal status of the applicant? Whoops. And I'm sorry, the second page of the form somehow is missing here. But it basically just asks a couple of more questions. So it's just a couple of pages. So I encourage everybody to fill out this application. It's so super simple. And they need to know. People are on this waiting list, and unfortunately for many years, and people are in need, but they're not going to know that you're in need unless your name is on that list. So, congratulations, you made it to the end. I know it was not an easy feat, and we went a little bit over on time today, and everybody's brains are likely fried by this point. I want to thank Parent to Parent of Georgia for hosting the webinar, and it's going to be archived. Hope it's been helpful. I want to leave you with a few key points here. Document, document, document. Ensure that you are getting all of your medical records and that it's in an easy read format. Like, don't have it be copied so dark that nobody can read it. Make sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. Something as simple as missing a signature can cause a denial. I advise you don't send it in until you have your packet together. So in most likely, there are some exceptions. Missing pieces can get lost and delayed. So don't send them a few forms and then send them another few forms. A lot of people get overwhelmed by this process and give up. Please, please don't do that. Reach out for others for help. A friend, a Parent to Parent of Georgia, feel free to contact my office. Me and my team would be very happy to provide you direct assistance if you would like to hire us. We do offer a variety of options to meet various needs. And you can visit my website or send us an email. We'll be back in touch as soon as possible. I am happy to be answering questions, so we can stop the recording of the webinar and Sitara, and we can get to our questions now.